Well, good afternoon, everyone. Before we get started, I just wanted to ask, so during today's presentation, please add your questions to the chat. But if you're comfortable doing this, please chime in at the end of the presentation to facilitate more of a conversational style engagement. So having noted that, I'd like to say good afternoon, everyone, and start today's proceedings. First, I'd like to welcome you to the last presentation of the 2022 iEar Salon, a virtual series exploring sensibilities, environmental bodies, and figurations for being in place, curated by the eArts Graduate Colloquium of Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, which has featured the work, screenings, and performances by such artists and thinkers as Ursula Biemann, Timothy Morton, Jenn E Norton, Jaguar Mary X, Linda Mary Montano, and now Špela Petric. This program has been brought together by Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute's Electronic Arts PhD students, including Hanae Utamura, Ali Wist, Arma Yari, Nina Isabel, and myself, John Santomieri, along with Arts Graduate Colloquium Professor Branda Miller and in collaboration with Professor Kathy Hyde. This program is part of iEar Presents, curated by Professors Kathy Hyde and Branda Miller, and sponsored by iEar Presents and the School of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences at Rensselaer Polytechnic, made possible by the New York State Council on the Arts with the support of the New York State Legislature. I hope everyone voted. I am John Santomieri, again, a landscape and plant-based artist from Western New York, and first-year PhD student here at Rensselaer in the Integrated Electronic Arts program in Troy, New York, as well as the curator of today's artist. Because this series engages with topics of deep ecologies and alternate knowings, it is with great pleasure that I introduce you to the work of artist Špela Petric, who seemingly inverts the question ecologist Robert E. Cook asks in Do Landscapes Learn? By positioning a research-based art practice that asks, among other questions, what can we learn from our landscapes and non-human vegetal environments? Answers to this question and others come out of Petric's artworks, which range from conceptualizing a shared semiotic language in their work Institute for Inconspicuous Languages, Reading Lips, 2018, reconfigurations of labor and ontologies of thing, tool, machine, and houseplant, featured in Vegetariat Work 0, 2019, to new figurations of sense, nonsense, human, non-human, and symbiotic performance, such as in works Play, 2020, and Scotopoesis, 2015. Špela Petric is a Ljubljana and Amsterdam-based new media artist who has been trained in the natural sciences and holds a PhD in biology, currently working as a postdoc researcher at the Smart Hybrid Forms Lab at Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. Her artistic practice combines the natural sciences, wet biomedia practices, performance, and critically examines the limits of anthropocentrism via multi-species endeavors. Her work revolves around the reconstruction and reappropriation of scientific methodology in the context of cultural phenomena, while working toward an egalitarian and critical discourse between the professional and public spheres. Petric received several awards, such as the White Aphroid for Outstanding Artistic Achievement, Slovenia, the BioArt and Design Award, Netherlands, and an award of distinction at Prix Ars Electronica, Austria. At this time, please join me in welcoming Špela Petric.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you for this invitation and this opportunity to share with you what I've been developing through the years. And actually, this talk I gave on the almost the conclusion of my postdoc. So just last Sunday, 3 days ago, we opened the final exhibition that sort of summarized the last 2 years of research, as well as, I think, kind of opened the direction to go forth. And yeah, so if it's appropriate, I'd like to share the screen and yeah, tell you a little bit about how where I started and how I got to where I am right now in relation to my art and plants and life and technology. Okay, optimize video. I'm just going to take a moment to hide the video panel and John, can you tell me, is everything set up nicely?
Yes, looks good.
Okay, because I can't see anything but my screen, but if you don't see any black areas, then it's fine. Yeah, so I guess this particular group of people, you listening probably know a lot about plants or have thought about plant ontologies and histories. But usually I start my my lectures by showing this picture of what is obviously a rabbit, demonstrating how blind we are to plants that occupy usually this backdrop or background. And this was sort of the point of departure for my art practice, because much like most of us, I too was really plant blind until I started working with them professionally. And for me, this was kind of a challenge to figure out how something that is so, on one hand, ubiquitous and so powerful and so essential and for life on Earth can be also kind of so invisible and treated as living material and so forth. And so from the start, my practice was aimed towards taking this understanding that I've had, that I learned, or that I've accumulated during my studies of biology, and put it towards reconceptualizing the relationship between people and plants on various levels of organization or complexity, in order to see, you know, what is at the heart of this plant blindness and if it could possibly be conceived otherwise. So it's, yeah, very much agree with Michael Marder, or at least I took inspiration from him, that much of this perception of plants is deeply rooted in our European philosophical canon and this history that takes the human and only a particular conception of the human, and then kind of opposes plant life to this figure of the autonomous, rational man, if you like. And plants clearly have a completely different strategy for tackling all the ecological challenges. So I will start by laying out some of the first works that I've done in the series Confronting Vegetal Otherness, where I really wanted to check, okay, if these are the relationships between humans and plants, do they hold true in the same manner if we have a human individual facing plants? And does it change if we have the relationship on a different scale, like cells, like human cells and plant cells in a petri dish meeting, or even on the other side of the scales when we consider plant communities and people communities in a deeper ecological time? When I thought, well, Michael Pollan, with his Botany of Desire, already proposes that you can flip the domestication on its head and say it's actually, I don't know, wheat that domesticated humans, because they completely changed us from a nomadic people to settlers, right, that were fixed in in space. So I wanted to look at those relationships at the different scales, also keeping in mind that mostly in today's techno-scientific realm, it is science that shapes the views of plants predominantly. And it is through science that we develop technology that aids us to perceive and manipulate the plants. So that was always an important element in these reconceptions of the relationship, not to not shy away from the techno-scientific dominance, I would say. So the experiments, I'll just go through quickly through them. You mentioned John Santomieri. I was playing the human, standing in front of cress for 20 hours, casting a shadow onto it. And then this was kind of a semiotic triangle that I was trying to recreate, you know, insist on this immobility and surrendering to the plant, to the point where I have proof that the plant actually saw me through this shadow that was the index. So this was this performance. So far, I've repeated it twice. Well, it's been 3 times altogether. And next week, I am doing a longer version, a 30-hour one. The point is not about glorifying human endurance, because what I do is nothing exceptional. I stand in segments of 1 hour, taking breaks in between. But the result is actually not just this imprint that we see here, so the etiolation of the cress that has been growing in the shadow and trying to escape it, which is sort of a semiotic pathway within the plant when it usually triggered when it finds itself in the shadow of some other plants. But this performance surprisingly also served to point to the cress in a way that was not obvious before. The audience experienced me not so much as this person in the triangle, but I was the index that pointed their attention to the cress. So I loved how as an artifact of this setup, I was actually the least interesting element in this performance. And finally, I was kind of, it was conducive to the audience really paying attention to cress. In phytoteratology, phytoteratology was trying to escape this geneticocentrism, thinking about genetic lineages and kinship through bloodlines. And I nevertheless asked, yeah, what does it mean to share bodies and to share this biological substance that contains information? And basically, can I make plant-human monsters by not genetically modifying plants to contain my DNA, which I guess was quite popular at the time, but rather to think about conceiving or this sort of ectogenesis, so carrying plants to term inside incubators or artificial wombs. So the cress is, the tail cress, so another cress, but not related. Arabidopsis thaliana was the plant that I worked with here. And it's kind of a model organism, so we find it in all labs, and it's well studied, including its developmental cycle, and you can make embryos from single somatic cells. So somatic embryogenesis is the way that I was able to produce these embryos from scratch, so to speak, from a single cell. But unlike they normally would develop in a seed, here they were developing in incubators that would be flooded with hormones that I isolated from my urine. So in a way, this technological womb carried information and some nutrients, but mostly information from my body, because they were steroid hormone isolates. And I wanted to sort of check what does that do actually when we sort of do a biofeminist capture of this phallogocentric technology to create plant-human monsters. And the conclusion of this that actually was that actually as soon as you, well, at least that was my experience, as soon as you have to employ these kind of protocols, you kind of have to submit to the rules of the interface. So it's hardly an intimacy that I would imagine would satisfy me or people in general, because while these plants were somehow mine in a different way than others would be, there were also plants that I could never really touch, smell. They were struggling. I saw them struggling, but you know, the sterility protocols demanded that this is the way that it's carried out. So that project really taught me or proved to me that, you know, you can't dismantle the master's castle using the master's tools, perhaps, or at least to be a little bit wary of the rules of engagement and how to set them. And the final work that I'll mention from this series was Strange Encounters, a microperformance between algae and cancer cells that unfolded under the microscope, as a way to realize that actually in biotechnology, human cells are often just as material as plant cells. They're treated in much the same way, and I'm sure you're familiar with the story of Henriette Lacks, but this actually extends well beyond just that particular cell line. It's the whole pharmaceutical industry, all the drugs that are developed on certain cell lines, on stand-ins for humans, where it's a question of where drugs are developed and who is finally the end beneficiary and or the end user, consumer of them. So there's actually a lot of, I would say, very radical conception of humanness in the industry of biomedical sciences. And I think this project was this kind of a very material demonstration of the meeting of the algae and the cancer cells, which ended up surprisingly in kind of this hybrid, which you see up these round cells with the smaller cell in the middle. This is actually a cancer cell that has ingested the algae and somehow in the process got disattached from the surface of the Petri dish. I was not able to follow up on what exactly happens there. I know that in about a week's time, mostly only algae cells were surviving. And okay, this algae standing on for plant was the Nanochloropsis. And the cancer cells were a cell line, a really aggressive cell line from a bladder carcinoma, also harvested from a woman that had been dead for quite some time. In this process, and in parallel to my work with plants, I also got the opportunity to encounter scientists working on supercomputers, and artificial intelligence wasn't far behind. And this was also at a time when there were books by Shoshana Zuboff published, and Kathy O'Neill, and then more recently Kate Crawford, who really illuminated these algorithmic cultures from the perspective of the user at the interface becoming a commodity, how we're kind of entangled within these invisible processes of classification, which are absolutely, which are absolutely great at manipulating us. And so the conception of the plant machine, or to make a plant that thinks itself a plant, was about creating an umbrella project to think about the issues of technology, this particular algorithmic technology, in relation to living bodies. And for me, an important moment was that this realization that actually the principle of organization, the principle of how algorithms know a body, how, let's call it, the question of how algorithms discern humans, what properties they're able to follow, the data they collect, how they organize it, and what it is that they're actually able to conclude from that, really reminded me very much about how plants are conceived of traditionally, right? So if we're looking at this classical plant ontology as a being that is almost transparent, it's flat, it has no interiority, you describe its environment and you are more or less able to describe what the plant will be like, and you can change its environment and the plant will change accordingly. So in a way, without necessarily paying much attention to what it is like to be a plant, we're still able to manipulate them very efficiently. So I thought these two things came together, and it seemed like in the eyes of, I'm sorry, just a second. In the eyes of the algorithm, we as humans are also already plants. And this shifted the opposition, sort of this dialectic between us and the plants, humans and plants, to basically the Vegetariat, which appears on this receiving end of the algorithm, even though the Vegetariat itself also is the one writing the algorithm. So I thought that would be a really interesting point of departure to address algorithmic cultures, where yeah, we can kind of see it as a way of manipulating bodies across the board without a clear distinction. Yeah, and I found that extremely generative in terms of what kind of artwork can be done. So the three works that I made in collaboration involve some elements of algorithmic cultures or AI, and clearly a disregard for the distinction between humans and plants. And I will just show the first one to you, Vegetariat Work 0.
Americans have Fitbits and pedometers in order to track their physical activity.
But as CBS 4's Gilma Avalos reports, some people have figured out how to earn steps without ever taking one.
This man isn't doing laundry. He's asked us not to show his face because of what he is doing with his company-issued step tracker.
Put the Fitbit in a sock, hour and a half on no heat setting in the dryer, 11,000 steps. Thank you.
He's earning 11,000 steps without moving. As is the case for many employees, his pedometer is linked to company insurance incentives that can lower his payments.
You are now more involved in, well, how much is this bill? How many steps?
Companies benefit from a healthy workforce, and many are rewarding workers with freebies for getting fit. But there's also a growing movement online to cheat the system.
We're starting with 3,472 steps.
We were curious, do the hacks even work? So we ran our own unscientific test.
This does still take some effort on your part to sit here and press this button for a while. Okay, there's a minute. 35:41.
That equals about 70 steps.
Within this setup that I was telling you about, it was actually considering what these sort of consumer electronics are doing with our data, the data that they track, and how we are biocommodities and bioconsumers at the same time. There's the logical step to actually equip plants with these Fitbits, right? With using the same type of hack that was suggested in this news report. So in this case, it's actually the plants that are equipped with electrodes that sense their neural activity. Of course, they don't have neurons, but there is a change in the electrochemical potential that we are following. And according to this, the rate of change, the smartwatches are spun faster or slower. So when the smartphone actually gathers this data from the steps, it is collecting some actual living activity. It isn't just noise. It isn't just obfuscation. That these plants, which are, you know, the classical tropical house plants that we have been becoming so obsessed with over the pandemic, it's gotten really out of hand with me as well. So they're sort of like these bioworkers, right? They're super equipped for this low profile persistence in the environment. And I thought there would be excellent candidates to start representing non-humans in this world of bio-consumers, bio-workers, and bio-commodities, to sort of pose the question, is this really the only way that plants can start to matter, to become consumers? And yes, this was sort of the interface to the plant activity, which was through the smartphone. Because basically the only way that you can use a smartwatch is to get proper analysis and feedback is through these applications on the phone, which always collect the data and they sell it. Where, to whom, how, well, we don't know. But at least now with this project, they're also getting some more interesting, spicy data from some houseplants. Another project, which actually preceded by date, this Vegetariat Work 01 with the drill machines, was reading lips. As John mentioned, this was kind of addressing this urgency or the use of technology as a go-between between humans and non-humans, between humans and plants, and how everybody, scientists, including us, the public or lay people, are absolutely enthusiastic over the opportunity that the technology would act as a translator, as a bridge. So I'll show you a clip from the work and then explain a little bit about what is going on.
Makimuche ga 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 ga. Spodi se vidi ga ga. Mama ga ga.
Okay, so that was the human interpreter of lips, and this is LipNet, which is an open source AI trained on human lips to read the lips of plants. So more or less, I would say that the human interpreter and the AI interpretation kind of agree as to what the plants are saying. Of course, it's all a little bit at the level of communication. So what you were seeing was actually microscopic leaf pores, or in Latin, they're called stomata. They're holes that the plants basically breathe through. So they exchange oxygen, CO2, water. It's also like a hole through which pathogens can enter. And the opening and closing of these leaf pores is really precisely controlled. So, for example, if there's if you have a drought, the leaf pores are closed to prevent water loss, or if there's some bacteria going around, they would also close the pores in order to prevent them going in, but mostly they react on light. So if you look at these leaf pores under a microscope and you take a time lapse, you can get these structures moving, and they really do trick you into imagining that they are lips. And of course, the point here was to, do this classical bait and switch, where while you are looking at the linguistic interpretation of these lips, you are standing beside the Tradescantia plant, exchanging all these molecules, breathing onto it. You are perhaps speaking, and the plant sensorium registers all this, and probably your sensorium registers a lot of the things from the plants, just not necessarily in this way of the language in the strict definition. So sorry, I don't know if you can hear this. They've come to get the trash outside. I'm in Amsterdam right now, and it's the evening, so hope it doesn't bother you too much. So sorry. Is it super loud?
No, it's okay.
Okay, because it's super loud here. Okay. Good job, microphone. So this all got me thinking a little bit how, while I'm making these plant machines or thinking about the Vegetariat, that in fact plants have been really exposed to these state-of-the-art technologies since ever, specifically in agriculture, where especially in the recent developments with this precision agriculture and all this automation, they are surveilled from the soil and the sky. So these are some satellite images that detect this vegetation index and report on where photosynthesis is taking place. This is a recent occurrence, but maybe you have heard of how in Ukraine at one point, I think it was the Chechenian army that captured John Deere's tractors and combine harvesters. And these are really, really expensive machines. So they took them to Chechnya to try to use them. And it was John Deere that locked them out, basically, out of these machines, these agricultural machines, because they can absolutely do that. And this is weaponized. This is the agricultural infrastructure weaponized during the war, but in fact, this is kind of a daily struggle for many of the farmers who basically find themselves in a position that they are no longer farmers, but rather drivers of these harvesters, and everything else is automated. There's actually almost no decisions that they have to make personally. And the flip side, if something gets broken, they also have no capacity to fix it. Not that they don't have the know-how, it is the equipment that locks them out. So there's a very weird tension between plant life that is not, I'm not talking about this plant life that is fetishized as being in the wild, wilderness, rare species, the biodiversity, right? I'm really here focused on the plant life that is most mundane, that we have the biggest intimate contact with, basically what we eat, right? And this kind of intensified relationship between the machines that take care of these plant bodies, yes, and the plants themselves. So I find them as, you know, really like these bodies or our altars, basically the Vegetariat. So it's examples like these, how these autonomous or driverless agricultural machines are developed, that I see a moment where we can also question where this technology is going. If it's okay for the plant, it must be okay for me as well, as a provocation. And I don't know, I would like to share with you, for those of you who have never seen a commercial by John Deere, I think it's kind of interesting as it.
Camera technology that was developed by Blue River Technology, a subsidiary of John Deere. So it uses computer vision and machine learning to scan the field constantly for weeds from crop, and then sprays only the weed. So let's bring it to life. So as our 120-foot boom goes across the field, there are 36 cameras mounted on it. It's constantly collecting high-res images. Those images are sent to the graphics processing unit, which houses the machine learning model. Then that model determines if there's a weed present or not. If there's a weed present, we turn the spray on, and then we spray that weed. That all happens at 12 miles per hour. So we're looking at 2,000 square feet every second. This is what we call green-on-green detection.
Green-on-green detection.
Yeah, so instead of just looking for green and spraying green, we're looking for a specific trigger to spray. So if it's a crop, we're not going to spray. But if it's one of these weeds that were in the field earlier, we're actually picking out the specific plant that we want to spray. All in real time and in the blink of an eye.
All in the blink of an eye.
In the blink of an eye.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah.
Let's go take a look at the boom.
What I find most impressive is that the same type of aesthetic and the same type of narrative is used here with agriculture, with plants, as in the other field that I'm really interested in, which is medical technology. And it always sells this optimization aimed towards achieving a certain goal. The goals, however, are taken as a given and not questioned at all. So I've noticed that the more essential some technologies are, the less room there is for a questioning of how we should approach this, like in this case, growing food, and less questioning about what just this plant life means. And I'm going to juxtapose that to another situation a little bit later. But just to introduce sort of this latest project play that I've developed, plants and an AI playing with each other. It really, really resonates with this technology that has been developed for agriculture in greenhouses. There's so much AI that is being used. There's so much robotics. There's so much prediction. Everything is very much tied also to the market. So it's a continuously adapting system that incorporates labor, usually migrant workers or temporary workers, plants that are grown as from seeds or from seedlings in Africa, in Uganda, and then brought to the Netherlands to be sold and distributed across the world, etc. Highly interesting. All the AI, all this tech that we've been discussing, and all at the interface of the computer, at the platform capitalism, and all this. This is happening just as intensely, or perhaps even more so, in these fields that actually make up quite a significant amount of our societies in terms of material flow and economic flow, not to mention impact on the environment. So which plants should we actually be thinking about when we are discussing these post-human narratives or plant ontologies? And to bring this to play, PL, plant AI play, was a project conceived to ask the question, yes, but can algorithms that stem from a certain legacy of uses nevertheless be applied towards a different goal? And play, specifically play as an ontological practice of living bodies and expression of freedom and sort of joy of being alive, is an interesting challenge, because in a way it lies in the eyes of the beholder, I would say. It is relational to some degree, either with the individual or like, sorry, the being itself in relation to their environment, or to different beings, the environment. But without these clear rules, or with the rules that are ever changing, as is a property of play, it's really, really hard to define when play is occurring and when it is not. And I think this is the perfect challenge to pose to these algorithms, right? So it's not a non-utilitarian activity that you're asking them to perform. It's actually an activity that is outside the epistemological framework that they were developed within. So I had the intuition that plants would probably play where they move most, at the tips, the roots. The roots are really hard to get to, and these tendrils seem to really scream, yes, this is where I have a lot of freedom and curiosity to interact with the environment. So I made these little time lapses and went through a lot of plants to finally realize that maybe cucumbers will be my partner in this work. And this also showed that it was kind of impossible for me to play with them in this way. It's just that the two time scales are really difficult. I couldn't hold them, remember where they were going to be able to move these sticks. So we made a robot, AI robot, with this team of two computer scientists, 2 engineers, well, actually 4 engineers, a designer, a philosopher, to come up with plant-centered robots. Of course, we had to appropriate all these electronics that were used. For example, this LiDAR scanner we put on a trolley to try to get like a 3-dimensional image of the cucumber plants. This is something that they sell in agriculture, but it costs 47,000 euros. And we got this one for, I think it was 700. It's RP LiDAR. And of course, tried to make the rail to do a 270 angle scan. And this is what the final robot looks like. So the degrees of freedom it has in moving the balls is 36. Well, it's 36 separate robotic tendrils made up of steel wire that it moves. They're wound on these. I lost the word. What the name? Spools. Yes, they're wound on these spools, and so these motors basically control the height of the balls, and the balls move in plant time, so just as fast as the cucumber tendrils. And the play happens when these two different entities interact. And yeah, this is a video, a very early one, trying to capture this interaction. There was quite a big challenge. This project has been in constant development since 2020. We really started building the body in August 2020 and haven't stopped since. So just last week, it got a completely new AI and machine vision installed. So this is a schematic of the old neural network. The new one works differently. This is a simulation of how the new neural network would move the balls according to the old data of the cucumber plants that were growing. And it's sort of a curiosity-driven AI, which means that it sort of preferentially explores, by lowering the balls, those areas where it is learning the most or forgetting the most. So basically everything that has in the span of 4 hours changed, that it wasn't able to not predict in this classical sense, but where the uncertainty between the predicted state of the cucumbers and the actual state of the cucumbers was biggest. That's where the ball should go explore, eventually leading to this moment when the cucumbers make contact with these balls. And this is another system, so another neural network that is separate from the 3D scanner one. These are actually 6 cameras. You can see sort of the area being segmented. And each camera looks at these 6 balls. And when you see them flash sort of white, this is this white cloud, the halo, corresponds to the the certainty that a cucumber plant has actually wrapped around the ball. So it turned out that detecting the tendril wrapping around the cucumber tendril wrapping around the ball is actually a huge challenge. So we're still trying to iron out this last part, because ultimately this robot is not something that would continuously play with the cucumbers. As soon as the cucumbers hang on to it tightly, the ball should stop moving. So as the cucumber grows into the robot and sort of fixed and shaped by the robot sort of has a similar process happening, but its degrees of freedom are lessened because of that. So that it eventually is also able to move less and less in a way of taking this interaction of gradually changing from play into this support in this cucumber trellis. So that was the work that we did in the gallery, and if there are some questions, I could easily talk about it for quite a bit longer. But in these last minutes, and I see I'm already 5 minutes over the time, I would just like to say that I was really motivated to see how much of this insight that I got by through working with programmers and engineers on these hypothetical situations in the safe space, in the controlled space of the gallery or the lab, how this compared to the use of similar technologies, at least technologies developed in very similar principles, in this real world, in the spaces where essential work is being carried out. So I'm interested in the infrastructures of care and the automation of care. And I realized quite quickly that, in fact, these spaces are highly inaccessible. especially if you say, yeah, I'm an artist, could you please let me in to see your surgical robots? That doesn't work. And a similar thing happens in the greenhouses. So I had to come up with another format, a methodology of entering these spaces. And I continue to do this, but the performative ethnography is one such hack, but also a collective knowledge making practice, which I guess this is the last thing I'll show you. Just a little video that we made from these expeditions.
As a predominantly production platform, V2 knows that most of the exciting things that happen in creative or artistic processes is not where the creative process materializes into work that is then exhibited in museums or in festivals, but is actually happening throughout the creative process and around these moments of experimentation. And that is why we've devised this curatorial format called 3x3 to put this experiment in, to give the experiment central stage and to invite a live audience into these exciting moments that all creative processes have inside themselves.
And this is actually the starting point for the next research that would lead to the next artwork. And it comes from realizing that there's an urgency to look at not just in theory how these relationships develop, but actually in practice. So what the task was that each one of us would assume or sharpen a role through which we observe these spaces, either the greenhouse or the Erasmus Medical Center. So we went to the greenhouse in Westland with a wonderful guide, Ad Verdown, and we were able to sort of observe the materiality and sort of the machines of these greenhouses and the specific conditions.
I ended up being a plant because I thought that's the most radical point of view I could take. So it's like an interesting thought experiment.
Took the perspective of a giant. So I decided I was at least 20 meters tall. So everything was like suddenly very small. And of course it was a bit hard because I constantly had to think about how everything would look from beneath.
I have a hard time seeing this because at the end of the day, for example, the ping pong player, they play against mechanical arms. They play against machines to get better. They play in the computer to get better reflexes and know when and how not to blink and all these yada yada. So like humans, we also get developed with care by machines in ways that none other human could.
And then in the third edition, we actually weren't successful in obtaining a guide similar to the greenhouses, but nevertheless, we tried our best scraping the internet for information about Erasmus Medical Center and went to observe its publicly accessible spaces on our own.
I can't escape the feeling that what we are seeing here is something that we've seen in series and movies 25, 30 years ago, and we said to ourselves, oh, hospitals don't look like this, they'll never look like this, and then they look like this. Why do they look like airports? No, of course, this efficiency looks like a very reasonable explanation to me, but if I can go deeper into it, what is a terminal? What is an airport? It's a point of departure.
And that's the problem of the way we transition from the 20th century into the 21st century. We are transitioning with a very costly technology that doesn't serve the patient, but serves the customer.
So I think that actually as a performative action, as also a way of moderating debates, it's quite an effective and nice format, which I would like to repeat again. Yeah. And we went actually to the zoo. I did residency in the zoo and performative ethnographies in zoos. And that actually taught me quite a lot about how obsolescence can also breed, be a good breeding ground for really pertinent questions. And I think with this, I would like to finish the presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I have to say that your work and your presentation always leaves me speechless when I look at the artworks and projects. However, there's still so much to be said. And I'm wondering, while people put their questions in the chat, because we'll reserve some time for the audience to pick your brain and think further on your artwork. I just want to say that there's so many fascinating things happening in your projects above and beyond just the realization and ability to see past the ontology of plant. And I'm so happy that you ended the presentation with this conversation on care. Thinking with some of the terms that you brought up, that optimization isn't necessarily a form of care. It's a conceptualization of efficiency, and even the relationship between the AI in the form of play and uncertainty of the plant, I thought was a beautiful performance. Uncertainty being something that I feel like a vining plant hates. So to see those kind of tenuous interactions and relationships is just incredible, especially thinking it through within this framework of play. And then lastly, again, I just was struck by your juxtapositioning of the greenhouse and the medical center, again, within this perspective of care, but also it's striking how it comes from a perspective of art as well. I think many times when you ask people or when you work in a greenhouse, it ceases to be an environment less of science and more of art making and choreography and performance. And it brought to mind your relationship, some of what Walter Benjamin writes about when he includes the surgeon as an artist within that context. So thank you so much again. You're kind of, again, leaving me reeling with so many amazing connections that you brought here to us today. Does anybody have anything in terms of a question, feedback, etc.? Yeah, otherwise I'll just keep stumbling along here. Allie, please.
Yeah, if no one else has a question, I certainly have questions and just want to thank you. First of all, it was absolutely fascinating. I think your projects are really smart in that they point out these really acute problems, but in a way that's really playful. And, you know, the machine's role in recognizing non-humans in the Fitbit project was just so fascinating because it really served as a critique or like a negative movement instead of this accumulation of steps and benefits. And but I guess the one thing I wanted to ask was just about the themes of surveillance that I think are incredibly compelling, like extending consumption-based kind of surveillance data, whether it's the Fitbit or the agricultural tracking, to non-human bodies and plant bodies, and just sort of how you view surveillance in the context of non-human experience. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that is a really, really broad topic, right? I mean, ultimately, I would say that I have been focusing more on the artifact of surveillance on bodies, where the surveillance is done with a certain intention and certain goal in mind, that is very much bound to some sort of extractive economy in one way or another. And I don't think that is the only thing that surveillance of non-humans can do, right? I think that there's a lot of examples where it is used by, well, activists or as ways of engaging differently, right? So, okay, one of the things that I haven't really addressed, but is in development at this moment, is the tension between the use of technology in permaculture, agroecology, and regenerative farming. Usually the people who are proponents of these ideas, and I think this is a really important change that needs to happen in food production, Usually they're very reserved when it comes to the use of technology, or sometimes reserved, sometimes absolutely outspokenly strongly opposed. So the sort of like the picture I showed at the end, it's from Bodemzicht, this regenerative farm that I'm working with. And they show this small shack with, you know, the shovel, the hoe, the rake. And they say, well, this is all the tools that we actually need. And what we're doing is we're regenerating the land and the food is a side product, right? What a beautiful notion. However, when asked, well, but how long does it take? Oh, I love this lazy farming. I said, lazy farming, right? All you do is you mulch the beds, and basically you don't get much weeds because the weeds are plants adapted to grow real fast when the soil is disturbed. Lazy farming. And then they said, this isn't lazy farming, it's quite the opposite. We need to spend like 17, 18 hours really working intensively to maintain this. So in the John Deere commercial, right, they throw around numbers. And if you look at how much time is needed to farm 1 hectare of, let's say, corn using this state-of-the-art, highly automated, driverless technology, it's 8 to 10 hours per year per hectare. And with just like some semi-automated technology, right? We're not talking about oxes and what is that? Plows, tractors. We're talking tractors. It takes 2,000 hours. How do you wrap around your head around that kind of scale difference? And what happens when? How do you introduce, nevertheless, some technology to the realm of agroecology and to the realm of permaculture and regenerative farming? So I'm not I don't think that all technology necessarily has to follow this route that it is on, where precision agriculture has the capacity to be absolutely non-invasive, and yet the way it is applied, it is doing the opposite. It is intensively monoculturalizing the agricultural area. It is nullifying all natural variation, right? That's what they say. We can spray the green on green, right? Like we point spray and get everything the same in the same state. All the cucumbers are the same size. So the question is, okay, yeah, surveillance, right? But can this surveillance be distributed? Because right now it's absolutely centralized. So all this information is harvested by the companies. They're protecting the data. It's the same with surgical robots. So it is the company that creates the machines keeps possession of the data and creates products from this data to be bought downstream, right? And so this is, you know, a surveillance that perpetuates this kind of capitalist system where you have monopolies. On the other hand, it's also preventing the development of alternative ways of using surveillance, where, for example, this would be a little bit more, I mean, it would be open source. It would be farmers using this advanced technology in a convivial manner, right? And in that sense, you would still say, okay, I'm using the same tools of surveillance, that all the sensors are there, you're using satellite data, you're using machine vision and all this, right? But the end result would be probably very different than it is now. So yeah, that would be like my take. Yeah, surveillance, especially the way it's used nowadays, is to the detriment of the environment, I think.
Thank you. Even just that premise of surveillance, you know, at least to me, connotes a very singular way of interacting with landscape, and you know, whether or not there are more experiences lost within that process of surveillance than interaction of work and thinking of what can be gained from those hours spent in the garden from personal experience versus having a militaristic approach of search and destroy in the case of the John Deere commercial. Are there any other questions before our grad colloquium gets to hog Špela for ourselves? Please, Professor.
I can't stop thinking about the fact that you're really looking at these very contained and controlled situations between the hospital, especially in the last works you were talking about, but also what you're doing. And this kind of introduction of cracks in the system or ways to sort of work around them are really intriguing, because we are sort of fated to perhaps these more controlled, scenarios as hospitals are, and greenhouses, et cetera, zoos. And I just wondered, like, how does your ability to introduce these notions of play actually, how is it received when people, I mean, besides obviously being delightful, to people, play is always delightful, I think, in some way, but within a kind of bigger system, like how, and I kind of asked this question not to denigrate your work in any way, but to have hope that you can move it into something very large, and effective, because I think that we are trapped a bit, by these systems that we're working within. And so if you could upscale or push even to a sort of bigger audience or bigger event through the performances and the artworks, how would you possibly vision that? Because I really like the way you're thinking about it all. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathy. This is what my challenge is next, right? Like, how do you actually bring it to the people where this could have some impact, because they're actually the ones creating the technologies or using them and so forth. I don't have an answer at the moment yet, but I am starting, these two projects. So one is working with developers of agro robots, literally robotics, asking them these questions like, but yeah, why did you make this robot? Did you do any survey about what kind of robots are needed? And the answer is, yeah, but this is what our technology at the moment allows. So it's like a completely convoluted way of solving problem solving. And then there's another, I just met them last week. Apparently in the Netherlands, there is a department in Avans in Breda, the Technical University, that are actually kind of trying to develop these robots that bring pleasure to people using them. Wow, so apparently it's not, at least here where this is like such an agricultural country, the Netherlands, right? They have been working on this, and I'm meeting artists that are also exploring these spaces. I am hoping that this will, I will get to know the people that are working there, to understand them enough to make some proposals that resonate with them. And this is sort of the long-term process and commitment. And I'm hoping that by doing these things in parallel, because the other project is the Ars Electronica residency with the Sustainable AI Lab in Bonn, who is working with some surgeons developing AI robotics for their surgery, again, out of sort of need a need, and also with this issue between let's say the Da Vinci providing the ultimate surgical robot, soon to be put in his place by the others that are appearing, right? But that there's many things that the surgeons themselves would desire that the robot would open, right? The company would open in order for them to use this better. My hope, my intuition says that if I continue to do the research in these two very different areas, it will click together in a way that I don't know, maybe universe, please help me. I have no idea that it would resonate, right? That it would open the mind. So the first goal for me right now is to work with the regenerative farm to the point where they see the potential of a totally different type of robot, right? One that they would also co-develop with the technology providers, at least to get over this ideological schism, which isn't serving anyone, because robots will be developed, and if it's not the right people, certain people giving them instructions on what to build, they will just build others, right? So this is sort of like the agenda, but to be honest, I see it for that I will be exploring the field for at least 1 or 2 years before I have a solid proposition, because it's just, it's complicated to get access, to get familiar, right? I mean, the previous work, I have been a scientist. The laboratory used to be my home, and that's a different starting point than right now for me going into these spaces which are absolutely foreign for me. Yeah. So
thank you. Thank you. Good luck. I want to see this happen.
Yeah, thanks.
And I think I can say on behalf of everyone that undoubtedly that connection will happen, and it'll be something absolutely incredible that we're all looking forward to seeing. Again, to be selfish, we're going to wrap up our public session here. Thank you all for joining us. Stephanie, I will take that chat and send it via email to Špela, and look forward to everything. So we'll ask you to leave now, or we'll forcibly kick you out. However, all the RPI folks are welcome to stay to just kind of expand this conversation further. And then I would also suggest anybody who wants to take a 5-minute break, Špela, feel free, and then we'll reconvene in just a few minutes to pick up our salon conversation.
Okay,
And thank you again.
very much. Thank you very much, everyone.